Welcome to the Fantasy Football Forge. My name is Steve, and today we will be going through the draft grades for each of the two divisions listed in the video title. Before you jump ahead to your team's grade, if you are going to be critical of the grade or try to call me biased, please listen to my quick explanation of the grades before doing so. Here's the Cliff Notes version of that. First, I'm going to have each player's grade on the screen. These were handed out immediately upon every pick during my live stream. I would be happy to go over any specific player's grades in the comments if you really wish, or you can go check them out in the live streams. All right, and here we are on the screen. You can see my 2025 NFL Draft Grade Scale. As you can see, this goes through the entirety of the draft. The players their grades are based on where they're taken and what draft grade I have on them. So, if you are taken in the first 8 picks of the draft and I have an elite grade on you or a top 8 grade on you, you'd get an A. If I have that kind of grade on you and you were my guy, you would get an S tier type of grade. And as the draft goes on, A is my baseline to start the draft through the first 56 picks. So, for instance, here at picks 25 through 40, those are the late first round to early second round picks. If I had a late first round to early second round draft grade on you, you got an A. If I had a better grade on you, a straight first round draft grade or a top 8 draft grade, you would get an S tier there. If you had a worse draft grade, a straight second round, you get a B, okay? A is my baseline through the first 56 picks. That changes at pick 57 all the way through pick 111. So right in the middle here, a B. At the heart of the third round, pick 74 through 92, you would get a B if that's the same grade that I had on you, a third round draft grade, and so on. For being better, you get an A, and worse, you get a worse grade. And then after pick 111, the baseline is a C. So for day 3 types of picks, don't hold it against them too much. If they have a C or a D grade, a C is good. It means that you got the player at full cost, but there's nothing wrong with paying full cost for something as long as you get the value out of it, and that's what I'm considering to be a C. Of note, you may have noticed also that S tier is no longer possible for player grades once we reached pick 73, also known as the middle of the third round. No S tier grades given on day 3 of the draft. Pluses and minuses will be seen after some of the player grades, and for the pluses, that just means that the player was one of or multiple of the following things. A, they were a my guy. B, they were a team culture fit. C, they were a scheme fit. D, they fulfilled a team need that stood out to me at the time as something that really needed to be fulfilled in the draft. Minuses are rarely handed out, but they indicate some level of doubt or uncertainty that I have that raises to a level that I decided to give the minus on that. Once again, I look to not give those out. Pluses and minuses had very little impact on the grade. They're mostly eye candy. They do impact it a tiny bit, but for the most part, probably not at the end of the day. I'm going to cover some individual picks for these teams, but the purpose of this video is to grade the entirety of the draft as a whole for each team on a scale of S tier to F tier. That includes E tier, just like my individual player grades did. And for the overall team grades I present, they are calculated based on the following things. 50% of the grade is a completely subjective grade from myself. 35% of the grade is based on the number of players drafted and in which round they were drafted, also known as draft capital or player capital. 10% of the grade is based on the players' grades that I gave out for the first day and second day players, and 5% of the final team grades is based on the player grades that I handed out from rounds 4 through 7, the average of those players' grades. Trades made, whether a team won them or not, are not directly accounted for. However, they do still have plenty of indirect impact on 35 to 50% of the final grade, even more, because that would have an impact on the subjective grade for myself based on the players that they get, and they may also impact future draft grades. For instance, if you traded away a future first round, well, guess what? Now this is probably going to look harder. It's going to be harder to get a good grade, I should say, for this one alone, and of course it'll still impact other areas as well. Going back to this subjective grade, most of that subjective grade is determined by how I feel when I quote-unquote close my eyes. I ignore where each player was drafted, and I just take in the list of the players drafted. How does that group of names make me feel? Also, do I see the vision of this draft for this team? Did they ignore any positional needs that I felt they needed to address? Did they navigate the draft well? did they get in at the end of positional runs instead of getting in at the beginning of those positional runs? Those are the types of things running through my head as I come up with this subjective grade. For the player capital grade, this is an inexact science. I'm talking about the NFL draft. We know that we're not incredibly good at predicting who will and who will not succeed at the next level. Just like some say dating is a numbers game, drafting is also a numbers game. On average, roughly 2 to 4 players in any given draft will become Hall of Famers. I could also list off a whole bunch of other numbers about the draft, but I have faith that you get the idea of what I'm saying. The more tickets that you have for the lottery, the higher the chances of winning it are, and you can't win if you don't enter. The player grades count for a total of 15% of the final team grade. Day 1 and Day 2 picks are weighed at 2 times the rate of those of the Day 3 picks, 10% to 5%. This process is not perfect, but it's fair. And once again, I would be happy to explain in the comments any of the specific questions that you have. Let's get this show on the road, folks. And we will quick recap those. With the 27th pick of the NFL draft, the Ravens went with safety Malachi Starks. Got an A grade from me. That's where I felt comfortable taking him. It's a good pick. That is a pick that I made several times for the Ravens. Not the only one out there that made that. Although I did get made fun of for it by a Baltimore Ravens fan. So I hope that they're okay with that. At pick 59, they got edge rusher Mike Green, who fell. That earned them an S tier, of course. That is due to off-field concerns. If you're not familiar with that, I can answer it in the comments. It's not because I'm not going to talk about it, because YouTube might censor the video or anything. It's just we're going to keep this show going, and a lot of people are aware of that. At pick 91, offensive tackle Emory Jones Jr. F-, was not a big fan of this pick. Now here's what I'm going to say. Some teams, like the Ravens, when I have a low grade on a guy and they take them, I just assume I'm wrong. So I'm assuming I'm wrong on Emory Jones. But yeah, that was much too early compared to where I had him drafted. Graded. Same with Teddy Buchanan, who they grabbed in the 4th round, linebacker. I do think that he has some very interesting, good qualities, though, and this was a linebacker draft that wasn't so strong, and you could feel that through the draft. So, maybe they reach a little bit, maybe they would agree with that, but they get a guy, their target anyways, so there we go. Got an F grade there. In the 5th round, offensive tackle Carson Vinson was a guy who I had my eye on. One of those guys who I would have said I feel confident that they will get drafted. I liked him enough. This was a little bit earlier than I had him, but it's an F+ for me there. Some of these picks, I talked about a little bit, but like one spot earlier or later can impact a guy from getting an F to a D or an A to a B earlier on in the draft, etc. So it can have big impacts if guys are taking one spot different. That happened several times throughout the draft. Then the Ravens followed up with getting cornerback Bilal Cohn, kicker Tyler Loop, wide receiver LeJontay Wester, and defensive tackle Aeneas Peoples, and cornerback Roger Longerbeam, all in the 6th round. Got an F for Bilal Cohn. LeJontay Wester earned him an E+. I actually do like that pick quite a bit for them. That plus wasn't necessarily because he was my guy, but because he fit a team need that I had for them as kind of a slot corner, wide receiver, and just kind of an exciting pick. I think Aeneas Peoples, that got a B. I thought that was a good value at that point in the draft. Get a guy who can bring a little bit of energy and pass rush to them on the inside of that interior of that defensive line. And then Robert Longerbeam, think of him more as a nickel back, actually, most likely a slot cornerback, and I had, a 6th, 7th, whatever the exact draft grade was on him, but I thought this was the area of the draft that he should go. Got a C. And then they finished it off with Garrett Dellinger, who I had a little ways higher, maybe a 6th-ish round draft grade on him at pick 243. That got an A grade for me. So all in all, I think they added some good offensive linemen here. I do have question marks on Emory Jones. He played at a big program. LSU was a guy who was thought of quite highly early on in the coming into the season. Maybe had a bit of a down year, and so he wasn't so much on people's radars in terms of the public. But Emory Jones might end up being a very good pick for them. They did spend a 3rd round draft grade on him. I thought that in terms of hitting their needs, that Baltimore basically hit all of their needs. They did reach several times. You can feel that in the grading from me. But I thought that they got one solid player. They took a home run hit. And then they got 4 to 6 contributors, which is very nice. And, of course, they also got a kicker, which, they needed one. all in all, if I were to describe this in one, not even a full sentence necessarily, the quote that I would put up on the screen right now would be good, but slightly disappointing, especially for a Baltimore draft. As you can see, my subjective grade for them came out to being a B-. My player capital grade for them was an A. They had a lot of picks. They got some good value out there. That's solid. Remember, these all go up to an S tier. My grading for the day 1 and day 2 picks was a C+ to a B-, and on the day 3 picks, they got a D. So yeah, once again, you felt some of the reaching that I felt that they made after, obviously, love those first 2 picks for them, though. At the end of the day, they got a B+/B grade from me. Let's go on to the next team, and that is going to be the Cincinnati Bengals. They started their draft off with Shamar Stewart, a player, edge rusher, big upside if you're not aware, but also didn't have a whole lot of production at the college level, but has all of the tools, a toolsy prospect. And for Shamar Stewart, and I say that all of them, big, athletics, physical, all of it. Got a B grade from me, though. He is the type of prospect that I would feel much better about taking in the second round, but the NFL does tend to take these guys around this area of the first round, normally, especially in a weaker draft like this, so it made enough sense. This was a pick that I did pick for Cincinnati several times this offseason, one of many edge rushers that I picked for them, but yeah, not a surprise here, and he's a great character guy. I really like him in interviews and everything. He comes off I would say, like, upbeat and cheery and everything. So, I think he'll be good in the locker room, which is something that Cincinnati doesn't always strive for, but could always, use. Then they took linebacker Demetrius Knight Jr. in the second round, got an A grade from me. He was a guy who I liked, wasn't quite a my guy at a time. Maybe he was for a week or two this offseason, but definitely, I thought, a good pick in terms of the player. I was a little surprised they did end up going linebacker. I did know that there were things going on with their linebacker room, but like we'll see with some other teams throughout the draft, sometimes there are things going on, but ultimately they get ironed out, and it's not a big deal, and the teams don't address it in the draft. But here, they went with 2 linebackers. They also took one in the 4th there with pick 119, and Barrett Carter, who's a guy who I was lower on than the public. I didn't necessarily dislike him, so I didn't give it an F-, but did get an F grade from me there in the 4th round. That was a little bit earlier than I would have liked to take Barrett Carter, but not a surprise that he goes in that area of the draft. Then also in the 3rd round, day 2 there, they grabbed Dylan Fairchild. He was a my guy. I also think that he is a great system fit. That's where you get the 2 pluses there. It's a D++. I did have him lower in my my projected rankings there, but I will say I was also higher on him than the public, than the consensus. So all in all, that's one of those picks where when I give my subjective grade, it's definitely not a D+ in my mind. It's much higher. Then we're going to jump down there to pick 153, guard Jalen Rivers. Another my guy type of pick. I thought a good fit for them, C+ grade. And then they finished their day off with running back Taj Brooks. Gave that an A-. This isn't... I actually think Brooks is fine, and I thought that the value fit. And so this is where, if he had been taken, let's say at the end of the draft, or an undrafted free agent, I wouldn't have put the minus there. Because at that point, now the draft grade is reflecting a little bit more of how I felt about him compared to the public. But here, in comparison to the public, a lot of people will probably think, there are some people out there, I should say, that Taj Brooks was like a 3rd round, 4th round guy. I didn't feel the same. So this is where I'm just kind of pointing out that I did have a different feeling than some people out there that you're going to watch their grades videos of. So A- for me. The value, I thought, right on here, though, and yeah, just definitely not a my guy where he was some other people's my guys. When it comes to how they attacked this draft, I talk about this several times. I thought that you, as a defensive coordinator, would probably go in and tell the team that they do not need to focus on getting safeties, cornerbacks, which is a lot of people thought that those were areas that they needed to, that they had to focus solely on defense. And I'm not surprised to see a split draft here, 3 defensive players, 3 offensive players. 2 guards makes a lot of sense to me, especially since you didn't get one with those first 2 picks. That was a position that I thought that they absolutely needed to add, so I was very happy to see that. But going back to how if I was Al Golden coming in here, I would have looked at the roster. I would have said these young guys, especially in the secondary, maybe not the edge, depends what you thought of them, and they apparently didn't think too highly of the young edge room. I can work with some of this. I can work with all of this. I think I can get more out of this than Lou Anarumo did, and I like these guys. And that's truly how I feel. I like a lot of the secondary players that they've drafted over the last couple of years. I think they've been misused. They haven't quite developed, and they're still young anyways and developing. So let's give them an opportunity. We have a limited number of picks in this draft. Let's, just draft the best players. Don't worry about me. I'll make this work as your defensive coordinator. That's how I felt. All in all, when we put some words on the screen about how I would quickly sum up this draft, I would say that it was a risky, high upside draft, but they approached it wisely, smart. That is how I quickly feel about the draft. So, all in all, grade, subjective, I get B vibes here. There's nothing wrong with this draft. Definitely not S tier, but I can't quite give it an A tier pick when you got Shamar Stewart, not a my guy. We really don't have too many my guys outside of our 3rd and 5th round picks here. Even have a guy who I didn't love necessarily in Taj Brooks, and I thought you reached on Barrett Carter there. So to me, this was just a normal draft, a solid B, not quite a draft that sticks out to me personally as like an A, but maybe to some other people. In terms of the player capital drafted, it earned a B grade. For the players from the 1st to the 3rd round, that was a B-. Remember, 10% of the grade, and 5% of the grade was a C-, with those day 3 players and the grades that I gave them. I think you can see where this is headed based on 85% of this grade being a B. Yeah, overall, this Cincinnati Bengals draft was a B grade for me. Here we go with the Cleveland Browns draft. In the 1st round, they took Mason Graham. They traded back for that. I didn't mind that. I didn't think they were going to trade back, so I didn't really talk about this one too much in the offseason. In fact, I had Jacksonville trade up to the 1st spot really early in the offseason, and then a week or 2 later, I had them trade up to the 3rd pick, and I never did end up having them trade with the Browns, but both times we'll talk about that when we get to Jacksonville, right? Did I get that prediction right or wrong? I also put it as short about that, but anyways, look at this draft. I've got a plus or more than 1 plus on every pick of this draft. So you can get a sense of how I'm going to feel about this draft. But yes, starting this off with Mason Graham, I love it. I love it. I did not think that Abdul Carter was necessarily a need for them at the edge room. I like their edge room pretty well. I did not feel like they couldn't trade out of this. I didn't feel like Travis Hunter was a mandatory thing for a team at the top end of the draft. I thought Travis Hunter is kind of the guy that you go out and get if you are close. And I don't know that Cleveland's necessarily close right now, especially with where their quarterback situation was at coming into the draft. So when it comes down to, that trade back, just a quick commentary on it, I like it for them, and I like what it opened up for them in the draft and the opportunities it gave them. And then I thought with the opportunities, that's the stuff that gets counted for the grade here. They did mighty well. One of my favorite players in this entire draft was linebacker Carson Schwessinger. He was a guy who I consistently said all offseason, look for him to potentially make it into the 1st round. 1st pick of day 2, Carson Schwessinger. That's an A+. Once again, Mason Graham. He's a guy who I think is an elite talent. That was an A+ at pick 5 for me. A near elite talent. Running back, Quinshawn Duggins, got a C+ grade for me for them. It was a little bit of a reach at the front end of the 2nd round. Nonetheless, I do think that he is a good player, and the plus there wasn't because he was a my guy. That was because I thought he was a great team fit to come in. They like these big bruising types of backs. They've worked really well in their offense in the past with Nick Chubb, and I think that Quinshawn Judkins is built in that same mold. This makes a lot of sense. When it comes to the overall grade, I did hold this against them a little bit. I thought, being patient at the running back position, especially through into the 4th round, was very important for teams in this draft, and they weren't not only not patient, but I thought that they reached a little bit on Quinshon Judkins, and then you look at what they got there in the 4th round at pick 126, they were able to get running back Dylan Sampson, somebody's like, some people's like 3rd favorite running back in this class, a similar type of running back to Quinshon Judkins in many ways, definitely both better in gap scheme blocking types of guys. A-plus pick there from me, so think of what you could have done with pick 36 instead of that and still improve that running back room quite significantly with just taking Dylan Sampson later. That's one of those things where I weigh that in my head as I do my that subjective grade there, and maybe why that's not an S-tier grade and instead was the S- as you can see on the screen right now. Then also in the 3rd round at pick 67, tight end Harold Fannin Jr., B-plus grade. This is the type of system that I wanted to see Harold Fannin Jr. in amongst a couple of other select teams around the league because of their coaching staffs. I love this. They're going to be able to utilize him wisely. This is a smart offensive coaching staff here, and Harold Fannin Jr. I think could be great in their system, and look for him to get involved more and more as the year goes along. Not talking about 10 catches a game or anything, but just those important kinds of plays, moving the sticks at times, getting touchdowns, and trick play types of things that fooling defenses with him on the field. That earned a B-plus grade from me. I really like that pick a lot. And then they went ahead and they took quarterback Dylan Gabriel at pick 94 in the 3rd round. I had a 3rd round draft grade on him. This is, I think, late 3rd, so that got an A, plus because he's my guy, plus because he's a wonderful fit, plus because he's a scheme fit and a big need for Cleveland at that point in the draft, earned a plus that they hadn't took a quarterback yet. And okay, here we go. We got our quarterback, Dylan Gabriel, somebody who I think can come in, step in, and play fairly early on in his career. Maybe not day one, though, and they're set up for that. So I loved this quarterback addition. And then we're going to get into it a little bit more because we already talked about Dylan Sampson. Then in the 5th round, they go up, they get quarterback Shedeur Sanders, gave that a B+. That's the best you can get at that point in the draft for other reasons of how I have my grading. I thought this was a fantastic fit for them. Obviously, I thought this was a great value. I felt like Shedeur Sanders should have gone early on in day 2. That's where I had him graded, and in comparison to like how I felt about the quarterbacks of the 2024 draft class. So, I mean, this is fantastic. If I'm a Cleveland Browns fan, I'm absolutely excited about what we did. We're going to have competition at the quarterback level. I think 2 competent quarterbacks. I think both great system fits here. Shedeur Sanders was not my guy. That B+, the plus is because he is a great system fit as well. I just love this all around. Dylan Gabriel, Shedeur Sanders, 2 totally different types of quarterbacks. Dylan Gabriel, the type who in college went around, picked up all of his wide receivers in a freaking minivan, okay? Shedeur Sanders, I don't think you would ever catch him driving a minivan. I don't know exactly about how much of a team guy he is or he's not. There's obviously conflicting stories out there. His teammates seem to like him enough, publicly at least, and have been rooting for him throughout the throughout the draft as he fell some too publicly. So, like, very different types of personalities, though. You got the humble Dylan Gabriel and the cocky, arrogant Shedeur Sanders. Both of them coming from bloodlines in the NFL, though. Competition immediately. And for Dylan Gabriel bringing Shedeur Sanders in, we're going to see. Is he NFL prepared or not? Can he handle the rigors of the NFL real quickly? Because either that beat Dylan Gabriel down and he's just not going to succeed, or that puts that little extra chip on his shoulder and launches him forward as the guy that they did take before Shedeur Sanders, and launches him forward with that extra fire going to be under both of their butts. Competition all around. I just love it for Cleveland. The one thing that I'd have done differently, and that they may have too, would be to have left Quinshon Judkins on the board, and then at that point drafted either Jonah Savaiinaea, guard, edge rusher Donovan Ezuraku, tackle Ariante Ursary, or wide receiver Luther Burden. I think all of them would have brought a little bit more value to this overall draft and would have pushed me into that S tier, S plus maybe even type of draft grade. Actually, that probably would have moved us all the way up to like an S plus, maybe any of those guys. As a final little note here before we get into my finishing this up, I drafted them Dylan Sampson in my 7th-round mock draft at pick 94. So there we go. They got him even a little bit later than that, but we both saw that fit. So you love when that happens. And all in all, how do I feel about this draft? Well, I felt that they let players fall to them, and then they took the best player available when those players fell to them. This earned a subjective grade of an S-. The player capital that they had in this draft earned them an A. The grades for the first day 1 and day 2 and day 3 all around earned them an A-. When we calculate this out, very close to being an A+, but also in between. S-, A+ overall grade for them. Once again, closer to the A+. That's why that's bigger than the S-, just to point that out. But a very, very good draft grade for Cleveland. That is going to bring us on to the Pittsburgh Steelers, who I felt really did a nice job of addressing their needs. I did think that they lacked aggression in their plan to address the quarterback position, however, but I think that there's a reason that they lack that kind of aggression, which I more often than not kind of have assumed all offseason in terms of the plan ultimately is Aaron Rodgers there, but if that doesn't work out, everything should be okay, but that will probably end up being the case. I think they feel pretty strongly about that. With the first pick of their draft, they took defensive tackle Derek Harmon. He was not quite a my guy, but I also think a nice team fit and system fit. And, anytime that Pittsburgh takes a defensive player in the first round, you can feel pretty confident that that player is probably going to end up being pretty darn good. So I like that a lot and also fit a need for them. So all in all, I gave him the plus because maybe if he was drafted a little bit later, 3 or 4 picks later, it would have been an A, and I probably would have just left it as an A, but so close to getting an A, B+. There we go. Then we got to skip all the way to the 3rd round. This is where I do feel like I didn't love the draft plan here. I wouldn't have minded falling back from pick 21. But that being said, those interior defensive linemen went quick. So also, maybe they read the draft really well, and once again, get a guy who I think excellent fit there. Go all the way to the 3rd round. You took running back Caleb Johnson. That earned an A+ grade for me there. They kind of didn't have much of a choice, but at least they didn't draft a running back at pick 21. That wouldn't have been good. So they remain patient. They get their guy. Excellent system fit. That's the reason for the plus there. In the 4th round, pick 123, they get edge rusher Jack Sawyer. Once again, does that not feel like a Pittsburgh Steeler? A+ fit there. At pick 164, defensive tackle they pronounce it different than I do. I always say Yaya, but apparently it's different. The pronunciation is way different than that. Mr. Black, defensive tackle, gave that an F grade. That's early for me. He's got a very toolsy prospect, upside type of pick. May never do much of anything. I assume he'll be on the practice squad to begin the year with them here in the 5th round, which is fine. But I just didn't think that he played excellently when it came to football necessarily. In the 6th round, they go and they get quarterback Will Howard, so they remain patient. They get a solid value on one of the many developmental quarterbacks that were going to go anywhere from 3rd to 6th round in this draft class always, and there they go. They get one at the end of that group, so you do appreciate the patience there for them, assuming that they got one of their guys at quarterback. And then in the 7th round, they picked up linebacker Carson Bruner, A++. Loved the fit, loved him. My guy, special teams kind of guy who I thought has a chance of being much more than just special teams, so that's why he was my guy. And then cornerback Dante Kent, I'm not familiar with. So his grading, I couldn't give him a grade, so he doesn't impact this at all in any sense, really. If you start to see like 3 NAs on a roster, then maybe it would impact my subjective grade. But it doesn't negatively impact the grading at all. For here, ended up with a subjective grade of a B, B-. Once again, not my favorite draft here, but they did get their types of guys, scheme fits. Ultimately, I felt like this was a high floor, low ceiling type of draft draft class here for the Steelers, and that's where, a little bit unexciting, B-, but also they got their kinds of guys. I have ultimate faith that, they're going to get 3 to 5 guys out of this draft class pretty easily, in my opinion. So that's great. Contributors, though, maybe not necessarily the superstars, the next Hall of Fame guy or anything like that. Although we'll see on Caleb Johnson. That's a nice scheme fit there, too. Player capital, got a C for them. Missing that second round draft grade definitely hurts them there. And once again, like everything along the way, like B is the good. B is 1.5 thumbs up. Player capital, the baseline is a B. Goes all the way up to a C. But as you can see, just missing that second round draft grade, even with the 2 7s, got them down to a C. First to third rounders, they got an A-. So strong start here on day 1 and 2 for them, but then went down a notch, a B, B- overall grade. But you can see really Yaya Black's grade holding them down. So once again, I think a solid draft grade here for them. I don't have a whole lot of faith in Will Howard, though. That's why you got an A- for Will Howard. So all that combined, pretty close to a B-, but it was a B-/C+ overall for this draft class for the Steelers. A little bit disappointing, but I think it'll be okay. And there we go. That's going to finish up the AFC North for us. Cleveland ends with an A+ grade, the best of the AFC North. The Ravens ended up with a B+/B overall grade. Cincinnati ends with a B, and at the bottom of the AFC North, I'm sorry, Pittsburgh, B-. It ain't horrible, but I mean, B, around a B. Going to be a lot of B's in this draft class in these videos, so get used to that. But it matters if it's a B+ compared to a B-. That's above average versus below average. That's going to bring us on to the NFC, starting off with the Chicago Bears. I felt that they hit their needs really well in this draft, so let's get to it. With pick 10, they took tight end Colston Loveland, got that an A. Then we got Luther Burden, gave that a B-. The minus a little bit, I have concerns about Luther Burden. Wasn't exactly my guy, so I did like him less than some people liked him. But also, on top of those, I probably could have gone with 2 minuses here. Even though I do have some excitement for this pick, I also felt a little bit overlap in the terms of like where they attack the field the most often between Colston Loveland and Luther Burden. Maybe we could have gotten a slot wide receiver a little bit later. Also, a lot of the times, Colston Loveland can be your slot receiver. So a little bit of a philosophical disagreement there in those 2 draft picks specifically. But it's okay. B- there for Luther Burden, though, with their second-round pick. Another second-round pick here at pick 56. They took offensive tackle Ozzie Trapilo, who is a guy who I liked. This was a bit of a reach for me. Then at pick 62, their third second-round pick, defensive tackle Shamar Turner, who unfortunately just was not my guy. He's other people's my guy. I didn't quite have... I couldn't give him an F-. I mean, the F was harsh enough. If this would have been a C or a B grade or something, I would have put a minus on him at that point. But, it just, he wasn't my guy. I was just lower on him, so we'll see. We'll see. That's not the first time they've taken an interior defensive lineman that I've disagreed with, and they've had some success with some that I've disagreed with, but maybe they were still a little overdrafted. So we'll see. Pick Ruben Hippolyte the second. I never heard of him, so it doesn't impact the grade here. Cornerback Zoff Frazier in the 5th round. Love that. I had a higher draft grade on him. Not too surprised. He was my guy, so I was high on him, and I knew that. Also, though, I do think a nice fit. I thought that they kind of might want to bring in this kind of guy in terms of culture and need. More so culture fit here. Tough physical player in Zoff Frazier, man-to-man kind of coverage guy. So gave that a B++ because it hit a few things that I really liked there. Then offensive tackle Luke Newman. Obviously felt this was a bit of a reach here, gave that an F. And they finished it all off with running back Kyle Manangai. I think that's a really, really nice find. Wasn't quite a my guy, but close to a my guy, so that's where we got that B+. Also, maybe could have just gone with a B+, because I also think, nice fit to add into that room at that point of the draft, especially. So, when it comes to the subjectiveness of this draft grade, yeah, I am left disagreeing with several things of it. There's a couple of reaches in there, especially one in the second round. Well, two in the second round, So I did have issues with this draft grade. This draft philosophy, how they approached this draft, and with some of the players, especially higher up, the day two kinds of guys that they took. I didn't have a full agreement with them, so that's how they got that C+ grade. Ultimately, I felt this is a very boom or bust draft class. Luther Burden, Ozzie Trapilo, Zach Frazier, heck, Kyle Manangai. Very much this draft class will be well looked at, or it's going to end up with one contributor in Colson Loveland. And how much of a contributor will it be? We'll see exactly, maybe, two. There is the risk of not really this draft class looking pretty bad in a couple of years. I think that's a risk. So that's why I'm a little bit measured in that subjective grade. All in all, I felt like this was a fun draft class that they got, but I would have made some different decisions. Also, I still kind of like more than half of what they did, so I did feel a little bit conflicted. It's just which ones I liked happened to be kind of lower on the draft board than the ones that up higher. At the end of the day, I think this is an exciting and measured draft. They came in with a draft plan. They executed it. I just don't agree with their draft plan, and that's where we got that C+. Player capital, A+. They had 3 second-round picks. That'll help get you up there in that grading. Of course, remember, could go all the way up to an S+, so we will see some draft classes go all the way up there. All in all, C- was the grading for the day 1, 2, and 3 picks, so that doesn't help the grade either, but that player capital, the fact that I could have been wrong and they could have been right, is going to help this overall grade quite a bit. Because, all in all, close to a B, but a B draft grade for the Bears. That feels pretty fair to me. I was pretty critical, pretty harsh on them, so I agree with that grade very much so. I like it a little bit more than my C+ grade because, hey, now if this class works out, well, you know what? I didn't give them a C+. I gave them a B. That's going to bring us on to the Detroit Lions and talk about having an identity. And you look at all the pluses, this was almost 100% either my guys or guys who I felt are extreme team fits for Detroit, and we wouldn't expect anything less from a Dan Campbell-led draft class and team. There was some reaching, but ultimately, who cares? Haven't we learned this lesson, especially with Detroit in the past? Who cares what order they get these guys in, or if they might have reached for a guy? If they reach for him, probably for good reason, and maybe they'll turn out. So, at the first round, they took nose tackle Tyleik Williams. This was a bit of a reach for me. I do think that he is limited. I think that he is boom or bust ultimately, even though his floor isn't. I think he's boom or bust at this point in the draft. We'll say that. In the second round, they took guard Tate Rallage. Love that. Gave him an A+. Tate Rallage definitely my guy. And also a team fit. I should have gave him 2 pluses there. Then, we got my guy off of the board in Isaac Tesla. I would say probably a culture fit, too. I don't know enough about him to say for sure, but given how he plays, that would make sense. So, with pick 70, they traded up. That doesn't matter, but they went up. They got Isaac Tesla. It was early for me at that point. F+, but also, I did kind of want to keep pushing Isaac Tesla up my draft board. He's a guy who I was on very early on in the offseason, and then he had a late rise to where you started seeing people agreeing with where I had him drafted, but ultimately I was still had him ranked higher than the public. So he was definitely my guy. I liked him a lot. We'll see if it was worth it. I like the fit. I think it's a nice fit. And once again, we'll see. In the 5th round, guard Miles Frazier. Thought nice fit here. A+. One with an A+ there. Kind of a my guy as well. Then we have the ultimate team fit in Ahmed Hassanin. And it fits a need for them. Fills a need, but culture fit, system fit, need fit. Got him an F++. This was a little bit early for me on Ahmed Hassanin. Remember, in the 6th round, it's not too hard to get an F. But so happy for Ahmed Hassanin and where he lands. Such a Dan Campbell guy. If you're not familiar, Ahmed was barking at the trainers, coaching staff, on-field help during some of the drills, actually during specifically one of the drills, before doing it, just getting himself pumped up, getting the coach pumped up. You could see the coach was immediately taken aback and then reacted in kind to it. The kind of guy that, look, he was taken off of some draft boards there probably, and he was definitely pumped up on other people's draft boards at that point. He's a CrossFit trainer. Played, he's an Egyptian national. It's still very raw to the game. Lots of growth to go yet for Ahmed Hassanin, but a really, really awesome draft pick. And, you got to think that his chances of success go up because of the destination there. Then in the 7th round, they took safety Dan Jackson, got a D grade from me, which not bad at this point in the draft. A little bit of a reach. And wide receiver Dominic Lovelet, a little bit of a reach. Also, though, a guy who I did like quite a bit. So I thought he would probably go undrafted. He goes drafted here. Fine with it. I liked him, so did give that a D+. When it comes to my 7-round mock draft, and you can see some of why I do like this draft, I gave them wide receiver Jack Besh and Joey Hobart. So 2 wide receivers. I gave them 2 offensive linemen. They went with 2 offensive linemen. I gave them an edge rusher. They got an edge rusher. I gave them an interior defensive lineman. They went with nose tackle Tyleik Williams, and I gave them a defensive back. They went with safety Dan Jackson, all in my 7-round mock draft. In terms of the positions drafted, not the players drafted, I gave them exactly what they gave themselves. So obviously, I like this draft class. In one word, how do I sum it up for them, though? Culture. And in terms of the player capital, B-. They were missing a little bit there with the 4th round draft grade, so just a little bit below average capital. And then in terms of their player grading, not the best for me. There was some reaching C+, C for the day 1 and 2 draft grades, and a C- or a D+/C-, C-/D+, my bad, for the 4th through 7th round draft grades. All in all, they ended up with a B+B. Thought this could have been a better draft class, but ultimately think they should get some players for it. Will those players live up to where they were drafted? Maybe not quite in some cases, but also maybe. So yeah, a little bit above average draft grade for me here. I like that grade overall. Let's go on to the Green Bay Packers, my Green Bay Packers. And if you told me all the names but the 6th and 7th round pair on this draft, the ones that I have NAs for, I would have said that this was an awesome draft class, but I would have been wondering who we got with our 2nd round pick and one of the 3rd, 4th, or 5th round picks that we had. So I felt like there was some capital missing, which will help to explain my grade here. I hope I wasn't too optimistic here with my grade. There are parts of me that felt like maybe I was a little harsher on other draft grades that I had similar feelings for, but let's start off with the 1st round draft grade. They went with wide receiver Matthew Golden, gave that a B. They went with, in the 2nd round, offensive tackle Anthony Belton, gave that a C. So Matthew Golden. 2 picks later, I think, that's an A. I had a 1st to 2nd round draft grade on that group of wide receivers that Matthew Golden's in. He was, however, my 23rd, I think, or 24th ranked player on my big board. So in terms, the grading has to be a B. In terms of where the Packers draft him, I'm perfectly fine with it. There were some other wide receivers, however, that I did have a higher grade on than Matthew Golden, and he wasn't my guy. So that's why we don't get a B+ there. But I mean, almost should have put a B/B+, because 1 pick away or so from my big board, 1 or 2 picks away from being an A, just to give you an idea as well. When we look at this subjective grade, I'm not thinking of that as just an average pick there, slightly disappointing for a 1st round. Perfectly fine with it. I'm actually just surprised that the Green Bay Packers chose Matthew Golden over some other guys, just in terms of team fit, in terms of what they typically look for. They look for bigger wide receivers who can help block and everything. They don't always pick the most electric guys, but you can see they wanted to add some electricity to this offense because they also took wide receiver Savion Williams, who I do think is a wide receiver. Some teams looked at him as a running back this offseason. I don't think I've ever seen a 6'4" running back work in the league, but we'll just call him a tool. He can line up as a tight end. He can line up in a wildcat. He can do end arounds for you. He can line up in any of the wide receiver positions. He can line up in the backfield. Once again, even as a quarterback in the backfield, or as a running back. You can move him around anywhere. And this is the type of system that I wanted to see Savion Williams in. And he was also a bit of a my guy. This was a little bit earlier compared to my grading, but also at one point I did have a 2nd to 3rd round draft grade on him earlier on in the offseason. I pushed it back a little bit, trying to maybe get a little predictive with that. Ultimately, love might be a little bit strong. I love Savion Williams to the Green Bay Packers. C++, though, with that being a little bit of reach compared to my board. Edge rusher Barron Sorrell was a my guy. Once again, a little bit of a reach, but a my guy, and he is a team fit. I wanted a different kind of edge rusher there in the 4th round or earlier, but Barron Sorrell, my guy, he's the type of guy that the Packers like. That's all I can say about that. So that earned him a D++. But once again, I would have liked to see an edge rusher with a little more juice. And you know what? They might have gotten that with the next pick in the 5th round. In terms of linebacker, I should put linebacker / edge rusher Colin Oliver. He is a linebacker edge rusher. They drafted him apparently as a linebacker, so that's why I put that there. But in a few other instances, I actually did take a little bit of liberty with changing that in cases where I Googled it to see what the team said about the player. I assume that the Green Bay Packers plan on using Colin Oliver as a designated pass rusher and a linebacker, assuming that they draft him as a linebacker and a developmental linebacker. And F+ there for me. Then 6th round pick, 7th round pick. I'm not familiar with Warren Brinson or Micah Robinson. I either didn't have them on my list at all, or I didn't have enough information to give them any kind of draft grade, and so they had an incomplete score on my big board in my draft grades. And then to finish this off, they went with offensive tackle John Williams, A++. I thought this was a good value. I think that he's a good scheme fit, and he was a my guy. Good value gave him an A. Scheme fit gave him a plus. My guy gave him a plus. I have in my notes for John Williams written that I think that there is a decent chance that he could be a starter by the end of his first year in the league. So, obviously, thought pretty highly of what I saw on John Williams. Ultimately, my subjective grade here for Green Bay was a B+. And I would have done a different thing with this draft. So let's just check that out before we finish the Green Bay Packers up. This is what I would have done. Instead of Matthew Golden, I would have taken wide receiver Jaden Higgins, who at that point would have gotten me a B++, plus because he would have been a my guy, the other plus because he would have been a system fit. I would have said that. I would have thought that. So a slight increase from Matthew Golden's grade, but I had them in the same tier, so you see that. Then, at pick 2, with the 2nd round pick, I would have gone with edge rusher Mike Green, who goes a few picks later. That would have earned an S-tier grade. Obviously, and I've talked about this too, the Green Bay Packers are a really young team, and there are some things that have come out, like 2 years ago especially, in terms of the team maturity. So if that hasn't been resolved, or that's on the borderline of becoming a potential Vikings yacht situation within that locker room could happen, I wouldn't want to bring Mike Green into that. But without knowing all the details and just going off of what I knew coming into the draft, I thought that there was enough to say maybe Mike Green was okay. Obviously, the league was still concerned and didn't feel comfortable with the answers that they got given the off-field stuff with Mike Green. Nonetheless, he gets taken a few picks later. Edge rusher Mike Green is what I would have done. When I do these alterations to draft picks, to draft classes, I am taking the next player at the position that gets taken off the board in almost every situation. There are a few situations where I might take one beforehand. Only one situation. I'll get to that in a different video. And then if it's not the same type of player. So for instance, typically Matthew Golden and Jaden Higgins, 2 different types of wide receivers. So if I were trying to replace Matthew Golden, I would have skipped over Jaden Higgins. I would have gone to maybe Kyle Williams being the next guy of that type of wide receiver or something, off whatever the next one's off the board is. So take that into account. But I'm not cherry picking. I'm not looking ahead either and saying, well, I'll go edge here instead of I could have gone linebacker there with that 2nd round pick. I'm saying based on my knowledge of how I thought coming into this draft, the positions would go and how deep they were and what was available at that time, probably that's what I would have done. So I would have gone with edge rusher Mike Green, S tier. Pick, grade is what that would have gotten instead of the C for Anthony Bell. Also, when I do this, I'm going to replace position for position, so we got an edge rusher. That's why I have both of those crossed off in red. It's an exact flip one for the other. And then we'll go offensive tackle in the 4th round in Jalen Travis, who I would have considered a scheme fit, both a mutual scheme fit and a my guy. Maybe not strong enough in either category to get 2 pluses, but would have gave that a D plus. Edge rusher Baron Sorrell at the same point gets a D plus plus, but the S tier the S grade compared to the C grade at pick 54 there, big difference there. And some of these don't always turn out to necessarily be a better draft. It's just me saying I would have done this, and then I find out. If this grading would have turned out to be worse, which it does in a couple of instances, we live with that, and I say, oh, well, I would have done worse. And I'll let you know in a couple of instances where I do look at it, and then I say, well, nope, I would not have made the draft any better. In the 5th round, instead of linebacker Colin Oliver, because of where the linebacker class was and the good ones were already taken, I would have held off on that. It seemed like teams weren't attacking the linebacker class, and of course I felt like linebacker, that was a bit of a reach. I would have gone with cornerback Za Frazier there because cornerbacks kind of flew often and early, and it wasn't considered a deep draft class. So that's where I would have taken cornerback off of the board. To me, that made sense, and it just so happened that the next cornerback after pick 159 taken was Za Frazier, a my guy. That would have earned a B plus because I had like a 3rd round draft grade on him. Then, with my 6th round pick, now I need a linebacker or a defensive tackle. Defensive tackles, interior defensive linemen, went early and often, much, much earlier in the draft. That's why I would have continued to push that off. Heck, maybe Warren Brinson would have been available. I don't know what the league thought of him. I know the Packers obviously felt he was worth it there. But I would have gone with linebacker Carson Bruner. Once again, he's the next linebacker taken after pick 198. A+. These were surprises to me. I made the decisions on the positions I was taking before going and looking at the specific players that came up. And I don't know that Carson Bruner and Colin Oliver, not an exact one-for-one scheme difference, but I think that would have been fine with Carson Bruner instead. And then in the 7th round, that's where I finally would have gone with a defensive tackle in Zeke Biggers. D, I think, solid. I knew who he was, at least, compared to not knowing who Warren Brinson was. So that's the difference that I would have made for the Green Bay Packers. All in all, when it comes to the capital, B plus capital for them. What do they have? 2 7th round, just push them over from a B to a B plus, apparently. And then my 1st round, 2nd day draft grades, B minus, C plus there, and my 3rd day draft grades ended up as a C minus on average. So, the grading here, not the best for the Green Bay Packers. All in all, though, this all ended up being a B for my Green Bay Packers, which is pretty typical of where I end up on their drafts, if I recall from the last 2 years of draft grades, which we can start to go back and look at next year. That will bring us on to the Minnesota Vikings. There they are. And at pick 24 in the 1st round, they went with Donovan Jackson, gave that a C grade, guard. At pick 102 in the 3rd round, they went with wide receiver Ty Felton. That earned an E/E plus grade. He was kind of a my guy, wanted him to be a my guy, never quite got to being a my guy, but I was higher on him originally in my rankings, and then I pushed him back a little bit, and then when he went in the 3rd, I was like, gosh darn it, I had a 3rd grade on him almost all off season. So, gave him an E plus, because he's just kind of like a borderline my guy. If he was my guy, I wouldn't have lost faith in him and lowered him, but I was higher on him than consensus. So, just kind of pointing out that, hey, I do like the player and and I'm mostly okay with him there, despite that bad grade. Defensive tackle Tyrion Ingram Dawkins got an F a little early for me there. Linebacker Kobe King, thought that was a good value there in the 6th round, and their other 6th round pick right after that, they went with tight end Gavin Bartholomew, who is somebody who I wanted to like. I like that name. I don't know. I wanted to like him. I only watched him like once, gave him an undrafted draft grade on him, gave it an F. Would have gone with an F minus, except I went back and I looked at my notes on him, and there are some things to like. That's probably why I wanted to like him, but when it came to the tape, I was just like, I don't quite see it with this guy. I'm not seeing enough that I feel like I have to get him, and they go up and get him in the 6th round. Might have even might have not been undrafted, might have been a preferred free agency grade on him for me. All in all, though, for the Minnesota Vikings, not good. Did not like this draft class. Felt like they should have traded back there from 124. The next 2 picks go off of the board. The offers had to be there. In fact, I think 125 got a really, really good offer. And that's what I did with them, almost all season, was had the New York Giants moving up to this pick. I just don't agree with this draft strategy here at all. I have not good written twice for them in my little bullet point notes. Not good. I did have wide receiver on my needs list, though, and I had guard on my needs list. So this wasn't a complete failure. I did felt like they hit some of their needs. I'm happy that they're protecting and giving their quarterback, their young quarterback who hasn't played yet, some insurances, some weapons, all of that good stuff in a shallow draft class of theirs. So I'm happy about that, and I do think that they got some good players here and players with some hope. All in all, though, this was not good, but it could have been worse. That's my short description for it. Subjective grade, as you can see, E+. They didn't get an F. Player capital, C-. Yeah, they didn't. It was well below average here. Could have done better to get a little bit more capital in this draft. We know it. We know that the trade offer had to have been on the table, or you didn't look hard enough for it. Picks 1 through 3 got a C-, D+ grade. Picks 4 through 7 grades, I should say. Rounds 4 through 7 grades were a D- for them. All in all, this came to a D/D-, closer to a D though. So a big D, small D-. Draft grade for the Minnesota Vikings. This is the worst draft out of all of them, in my opinion. I'm sorry, Minnesota, for that. I had a Minnesota Vikings fan in the live stream with me, who's a fan of the channel, and he didn't like it either. So sorry I couldn't give you a better draft grade, my dude. Hope to see you in the comments. That's almost it for the video. Here is the NFC North final grades. Got a B+/B for the Detroit Lions. Green Bay got a B. I think people might disagree with me on this. Chicago got a B, B-, because they had 3 second-round draft players in the second round. And then, of course, Minnesota Vikings are at the bottom with a D, D-. So all in all, not a great draft class here for the NFC North, in my opinion, but got some players, so should be some players. In terms of, was this a good year to not have a great draft class from Minnesota? Yeah, because I didn't think that anybody else necessarily killed it, at least, so you're not losing a whole, lot of steam compared to the rest of the division. But there it is. That's the NFC North. That was the AFC North, and a different division will be in the next video. Thank you very much. Stay tuned. Bye-bye.